Your Majesty, honored guests, dear audience. I'm very proud to welcome you to the 2022 Child10 Award. My name is Jakob Flad, and I'm the Secretary General of Child10.
And I'm Faryal Sajjad, and I'm the Program Manager at Child10.
Before we start with today's program, I want to acknowledge the horrifying attack on Ukraine right now. As we know, children always suffer the worst consequences in times of war and conflict. And in times like these, it's get even more obvious that we need to come together as a community across borders to protect children. And to stand in solidarity with the organizations and activists who are fighting for their rights. And violence against children are happening every day in all parts of our world.
Thank you, Jacob. As you rightfully pointed out, it is now more urgent than ever to support and follow the ones who are at the forefront of protecting children from all forms of violence. As Program Manager for International Programs at Child10, I am responsible for the work with our 10 awarded member organizations who you will meet today. These organizations all work on the ground with victims of violence and at-risk children. And together with Jacob, I will walk you through the next hour and a half. Jacob, would you please walk us through the theme for this year and today's agenda?
Yes, thank you, Faryal. So every year, Child10 awards 10 organizations working to combat trafficking and exploitation of children. And the theme for this year's Child10 Award is Slipping Through the Net, Trafficking and Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children via Online Platforms. And since 2014, we have awarded 80 different organizations from all parts of the world. And today's theme is based on the fact that during the last years, there has been a substantial increase of online aspects throughout the entire chain of exploitation of children. Online manipulation, recruitment, controlling, advertisement, and exploitation of children has more or less entirely become the modus operandi of perpetrators and traffickers. And today we will discuss rising challenges as well as listening to the most impressive actions being made. With us today, we have some very special guests, including Her Majesty Queen Sylvia, who will share a special message with us. We will also hear from an expert panel on survivor inclusion, including our previous awarded member, Malaika Uringo, CEO of Footprint to Freedom, and Gabriella Kärnekull-Wolf, the newly appointed and the world's first ombudsman against commercial sexual exploitation of children. And we have international leaders in the fight against child trafficking who will share their insights on what's going on at a policy level. We have Elias Chatsis from UNODC and Catherine Bauer-Balst from the EU Commission.
And of course, we will meet representatives from the 10 awarded member organizations who've been selected from 130 candidates from more than 30 countries. These organizations all vary in their geographical locations, their cultural and legal environments, as well as the topics that they focus on. However, they're all connected strongly by a common vision to end child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. This is also at the core of our own values at Child10, and now these 10 organizations will form part of the Child10 Action Group.
Thank you, Faryal. But before we move on and listen to and meet our first guest, can you expand a little bit more on what it means to become a Child10 awarded member and be a part of the action group?
Certainly, Jacob. The award program consists of two parts. The first part is an organizational support program, which entails a financial grant of around 10,000 euros for each organization, along with support throughout the year to strengthen the organization and scale their impact. The second part is more collaborative, and that is driven by Child10's commitment for enhancing coordination and collaboration in this field. Child10 and the 10 awarded member organizations will all work together throughout the year as a unified action group to discuss insights, best practices, develop new solutions, and to strengthen the collective voice against child trafficking and sexual exploitation of children online. And that work has already started, Jacob.
Great, so no time to waste then. Let's move on and meet our first Child10 awarded member. And as mentioned, the awarded members work across all Europe. However, we will start off quite close to where we are right now, in Stockholm, Sweden.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm excited to introduce our first awarded member of 2022, Stora Syster from Sweden. We're proud to have Stora Syster as an awarded member. Stora Syster offers support in the form of chat services, legal advice, and counseling to victims of sexual violence. The organization raises awareness and knowledge through lectures, research and training, and provides a vital platform for women and girls to share their stories, which in turn raises sexual violence on the political agenda to influence systemic change.
And together with us now, we have Cecilia Bödker Pedersen, the Secretary General of Stora Syster. Cecilia, thank you for your great work and welcome to be a Child10 awarded member.
Thank you.
One thing that has impressed us in your work, apart from your comprehensive and holistic support model, is that you have a really strong advocacy that is anchored in the experiences of the beneficiaries that you meet. And Sweden is often ranked high when it comes to gender equality, but how would you describe your experiences when it comes to supporting victims and advocate towards authorities in the context of addressing sexual violence as a gendered crime?
I would say that Sweden is a more gender equal country in comparison to many others, but we still have a long way to go to be fully equal. Stora Syster therefore believes it is of great importance to have a gender-sensitive approach in all of our programs in order to reach victims of sexual offenses and support them in the best way. We need to make sure that we understand the root of the problem of sexual violence. Sexual violence is a clearly gendered issue where the majority of those exposed to sexual violence are women or girls, and the majority of perpetrators are men or boys. In addition to the fact that sexual violence often leads to physical, mental, and sexual health issues for the victim, men's violence against women entails extensive economic costs for society. The European Institute for Gender Equality estimates that gender-based violence in Sweden alone costs 8.7 billion euros annually. And men's violence against women also entails that all women and girls, regardless of whether they are exposed to direct violence or not, need to adapt their lives to the risk of being subjected to sexual violence. So we therefore believe in the importance of understanding sexual violence as a gendered problem, and that this perspective is a necessity in the work of supporting victims and in Stora Syster's advocacy work towards authorities and policymakers.
Thank you, Cecilia. Sexual violence is indeed a gender issue, and getting to the root of the problem is definitely critical to finding durable solutions, as you rightfully pointed out. And our next awarded member for 2022 actually has this belief at the core of their work. Please allow me to introduce our next awarded member for 2022, Protect Children from Finland. We're proud to have Protect Children as an awarded member. Protect Children takes a holistic approach to prevention and protection of children from sexual harassment, grooming, and sexual violence. Their research and educational programs are targeted at victims and at-risk children, as well as their families and caregivers, but also at perpetrators and potential offenders to address the demand side and ultimately protect children from sexual violence everywhere.
And welcome Nina Vaaranen-Valkonen, Executive Director of Protect Children.
Thank you, we are honored.
Nina, as a part of your work, you have conducted some groundbreaking and comprehensive research on perpetrator psychology and behavior through service distributed on the dark web. At the same time, you also work with preventative activities for children as young as 5 years old. Are there any specific insights from these programs that you could share that could be beneficial for other organizations?
Yes, thank you, Jacob. We all know that the risk and threats that children face online today are significant and more severe than ever. We Protect Children believe that if we want to make a meaningful difference, we need to tackle sexual violence against children from multiple angles. Wide and comprehensive framework does matter. Our everyday work is based on international child rights standards and legislation. The sole focus of our work is to end all forms of sexual abuse and exploitation and the trafficking of children for sexual purposes. All crime prevention efforts and work should be based on new and valid research. With our offender-focused prevention redirection funded by End Violence, we have gathered data from the individuals who view child sexual abuse material in the dark web. We have gathered over 15,000 answers from them, and we know it's sad that they are not only viewing the material, mainly, they are also actively contacting children for sexual purposes. Therefore, we need to work together to protect children. We are always stronger together. And it's everyone's responsibility to build a safer and better digital daily life for every child.
Thank you so much, Nina. And before we move on to meet the rest of our awarded members, we have a special guest joining us to share some insights. He's a qualified lawyer with vast experience from international work against human trafficking. And every day he leads a team of more than 60 experts working to stop these violations of human rights. Elias Chatsis heads up the global team at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, committed to countering human trafficking and migrant smuggling. The core function is to assist member states to implement the Trafficking in Person Protocol and the Smuggling of Migrants Protocol, both supplementing the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. Elias is a lawyer and has held a number of senior legal positions within UNODC, as well as other international organizations prior to his current position. Welcome, Elias Chatsis.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here with us today. So, Elias, what is UNODC currently doing to address child trafficking for sexual exploitation?
Yeah, but before going to this, let me first of all also congratulate from my side the awarded NGOs and also your work and the event you're putting out today, because I cannot stress enough the important role of civil society in addressing trafficking persons. So congratulations to all of you. Now, in the online sexual exploitation of children, we have three of the most difficult elements of trafficking in persons. We have, first of all, children. And as you know, we keep saying it, global data show that one third of all trafficking victims globally are children. And you know the millions of victims that we have globally. Imagine that the size of this group of victims that is a child. And the second one is that we have sexual exploitation, which is the most prevalent form of trafficking in persons and the most difficult to address. And the third one is the online element, which is an element that has been growing over the years and that has become, unfortunately, part of the mainstream function of the criminal networks. Now, what we do? First, we try to understand better the problem because it's evolving, especially because of the online element. And the last 2 years, we have published a number of reports on that, try to identify better how the crime evolves. So we did actually a global report at the end of last year. There's another one coming at the end of this year that will show global trends and definitely has always a chapter on trafficking of children. Second, we did also study on the online aspects of trafficking in persons. And the facts are not, they're not good. There's an increase in the numbers. It's an extreme vulnerability. And thus we then take as information to the justice authorities, to the prosecutors, to the police officers, to the judges, and help them also understand what they're dealing with. And that's a lot of problems here because, some of the countries we're dealing with are low-resource countries. Not all the countries are the countries, that the resources that the European countries have. So it's an uphill battle for them. So our role is first to help them understand the crime and then, help them also internationally cooperate between themselves, but also with the private sector, which has an important role to play in combating the online element.
Thank you, Elias. And I know that you have previously stated that almost all cases concerning child trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation today have an online element, as you mentioned now as well. But what implications does this have on the general anti-trafficking work, would you say?
Let me just finesse a little bit this statement. What I meant to say, what I'm trying to say is that in today's, in the way that criminal networks work today, the online element is almost an integral part of their operations. There are probably also cases which happen the way that we used to, like 15, 20 years ago. But nowadays, it's very difficult to find a case which does not have a platform involved, where the communication has taken place, where the recruitment has taken place, or does not have some form of digital payment, for example, or does not use websites to advertise the services. So these are now parts that we see in almost every case of trafficking in persons. Now, how this has changed the crime, it has made it more difficult. As simple as that. There are now the online world, sex trafficking can happen, and of children also, it can happen purely online. The child and the abuser may be in one place, the servant in another, and in another continent, and the user in a third continent. And we have cases where, for example, we had a case like this where a court case where a child was abused online, and payments were made through an online payment platform. And it happened entirely online. The people never met, the user, never met the abuser or the child in person. So that makes it extremely difficult. It makes it also extremely difficult because we need to have the cooperation of the private sector. And unfortunately, things are not where we would like them to be with regard to cooperation between state sectors and private sectors in this one. The big companies, the big platforms are global and, they may not be very ready to hear requests from countries that have not the resources, that don't have the language skills, and so on to put forward requests and the means. So it has made it much more difficult to investigate.
Yeah, and in a context of this, how, but also in general, what influence would you say that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on online sexual exploitation? I mean, the development in the recent 2, 3 years.
I think it's one of the major factors to what I have described in becoming a much more difficult crime to address. Imagine that I'm a father of 3 children, and in the past I would tell them to stay off, the network and look at the internet maybe an hour a day. And for months or for 2 years almost, I'm telling them that they have to be online because they have to get schooling online. So children become much more exposed to these threats. And it's much more difficult because we have not been equipped. We did not expect it. We're not equipped to do it. We're yet not equipped to do it. One thing that I wanted to add to what I said before is also that, the online world has made it a little bit also, it has also a positive side in a way. The technologies are now cheaper to access. And so it's not beyond the means of low-resource countries. And they also offer potential of better investigations and better prosecutions of the crimes. But the countries need to have the skills to make use of these cheaper resources that are available.
Thank you so much, Elias, and thank you for being here with us today and share your valuable insights from the important work that you do.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
It is now time to move on to our third awarded member for today. As Elias mentioned, traffickers are increasingly using online channels to target their victims, which makes prevention and protection more difficult. And the problem has only increased during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our next organization works with prevention to increase awareness about the concerning developments that Elias just talked about. Please welcome Network Against Human Trafficking from Germany. We're proud to have Network Against Human Trafficking as an awarded member. They're dedicated to preventing human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Through their workshops, trainings, and educational material, the organization aims to help prevent exploitation and cyber grooming, as well as to equip professionals with tools to recognize and report trafficking. The organization is also conducting exploratory research among incarcerated traffickers to investigate the possibility of prevention.
And I'm proud to introduce Shannon von Schiller, Executive Director of Network Against Human Trafficking. Shannon, one of your core programs is your preventative activities in schools in Germany. Can you tell us about the concerning developments that you see among children and youth in Germany when it comes to commercial sexual exploitation of children, including online, and how you address this in your activities?
Yes, thank you for that great question, and thank you for considering us for this award. We're just thrilled. Prevention work is really fundamental for every country, and here in Germany, the vast majority of minors that are exploited commercially for sex are actually German citizens. So it's really key to reach children and youth within our country to keep them from being exploited. Our program focuses on informing the kids about different types of trafficking, especially the so-called lover boy method, where men groom girls in a romantic relationship and then in prostitution. Recruiting happens in the real world, but increasingly online and on social networking platforms and dating apps, as we've heard. We help the teens understand the problem and identify their own beliefs and behaviors that could make them vulnerable, and then empower them to make changes to protect themselves. Some important topics that we cover in our program are healthy relationships, personal boundaries, increasing self-esteem, and of course, where to find help. We have seen a significant rise in the number of children and youth being groomed and exploited for sex, especially in the last 2 pandemic years. The German Federal Police, in fact, has reported an almost 62% increase in 2020. Schools were closed for much of that time, and kids were spending a lot of time online, unsupervised, and traffickers, they capitalized on that opportunity. So we developed an online version of our program and increased our efforts to talk about online safety and the tactics of traffickers online. And young people they're feeling enormous pressure to look like Instagram models, or they aspire to have luxury items. And these are all things that a trafficker or a sex buyer can exploit. And that is also why we're seeing an alarming rise in so-called pocket money prostitution, where mostly girls are prostituted so that they can buy luxury items or have a bit more money. Boys, of course, can be targets too, especially through online gaming. So we try to encourage the kids to view social media and the messages that they're receiving on how men and women should be very critically. We want to empower them to live their best possible life, free from any type of manipulation or exploitation.
Thank you, Shannon. As
Thank
we
you.
proceed with our program, we will continue across the border from Germany to Belgium, where we find our 4th awarded member of 2002. I'm very excited to welcome Child Focus from Belgium to the Child10 group. We're proud to have Child Focus as an awarded member. Child Focus is the Belgian foundation for missing and sexually exploited children. With a dedicated child rights-based approach, they go the extra mile to fight against and prevent the disappearance and sexual exploitation of children through their support helplines, prevention programs, as well as lobbying and advocacy.
And with us from Child Focus, we have Nell Brothart, Chief Prevention and Development Officer. Nell, as we just heard, you have a very strong child rights-based approach in your programming. I know that you develop your programs to be very inclusive, but at the same time you manage to tailor them to specific vulnerable groups. How do you do this difficult balancing act? Are there any best practices examples that you could share with us that might be inspiring for other organizations watching this?
Thank you, Jacob, and also thank you for considering us for this award. We are very happy and proud to be part of your network as of now. A very good question also. We indeed believe that it's important that we try to work for all of the kids and all of the kids in Belgium. We have a lot of programs that serve the general public, but on the same time, often funding is not so high, and we try to do everything in the best way, and there sometimes we have to make strategic choices, and more we are directing those strategic choices towards those children who need our support the most. So although we will always keep on building activities, resources for the general public, we also start looking to those children who are extra vulnerable, although sometimes number-wise, they might be a small niche group. So they don't are the big numbers of children, but they are the ones who need our support the most. So therefore, it's very important to understand what those needs are. And in order to be able to do so, we found that the secret is mainly in involving the target group or field workers and experts who are working with them in the development, in the conceptualization of our tools, of our resources, and to really have them partner with us to develop something that might work very concretely for a very vulnerable target group. For instance, we are experts in prevention of online sexual exploitation of children and e-safety for children in general, but we wanted to develop something specifically for children dealing with autism. And we noticed that our tools were not sufficient for them, so we teamed up with people who are really experts in autism in order to really develop something together with them. We did the same thing with people working with victims of lover boys. So there too, we really try to make the combination between doing a vast majority of the work ourselves from our expertise, but also involving those who are dealing with the target groups and the most vulnerable target groups in order to be able to help those children who need our support the most.
Thank you so much, Nell, and great to have you on board. We will now move on in the program to our next special guest. It's Catherine Bauer-Balst is the head of unit Security in the Digital Age in Directorate General Migration and Home Affairs of the European Commission. Catherine's unit develops legislative proposals and policy and coordinates EU efforts to better fight cybercrime. She also co-chairs the Commission's informal task force on electronic evidence and the Governmental Advisory Committee Working Group on Public Safety Issues within ICANN. Welcome, Catherine. And we have been talking today a lot about the commercial sexual exploitation. But what would you say is the relation between commercial and non-commercial sexual exploitation?
That's a great question. And I'm very happy to follow also on Ilias Schatz's remarks on this, who already identified the internet as a key factor. So as we've seen, especially over the pandemic, but also before, the sharing of child sexual abuse materials has increased exponentially on the internet, and the internet has made it much easier for abusers to contact and groom children, as Shannon also just mentioned. And when it comes to child sexual abuse, most offenses are in fact not committed for financial gain. Most of the child sexual abuse material that we currently see in circulation online is produced to satisfy the offender's own sexual appetite, but it is also used increasingly as a kind of sick currency of its own. So when we speak of non-commercial exploitation, let me be clear that while it's not always money that is changing hands, we see a clear trend of commodification of child sexual abuse material. It is increasingly used for trades with other offenders to receive materials or to receive access to victims in return. Now, this type of material or exploitation has to be addressed differently than exploitation for money, since the follow the money approach that we can use in investigations relating to payments will not work here. At the same time, for the smaller segment of commercial exploitation, the monetization of child sexual abuse images is also increasing, mostly on the dark web, as the Finnish award winner has already highlighted. And law enforcement, in fact, estimates that the annual revenue of exploitation websites has more than tripled over the last 4 years. And cryptocurrencies are the currency of choice for these types of transactions, which creates particular challenges in tracing and identifying the origin of any payment. Now, the most prominent form of commercial abuse is child abuse at a distance for payment. This can consist of self-generated explicit images or even live streaming of abuse on demand. In some cases, offenders pay minors directly to provide self-generated explicit content, as Shannon was just highlighting. And in fact, in a recent Swedish survey, half of the 13,000 children aged between 10 and 17 years who were surveyed had already been offered money for a nude image, half of them. It is, of course, particularly tempting for children who are not born into well-off families and may see this as a source of income. In other cases, offenders pay persons close to the children to perform abuse at their direction and to live stream it. Here, in theory, we could actually trace the origin with the follow the money approach if law enforcement managed to identify what is happening in time. But unfortunately, live streaming leaves no trace. So as soon as the stream ends, all the evidence disappears. So in many cases now, we cannot help. And this brings me back to what Ilias was already saying, that we're dealing with a public space that is almost entirely in private hands. And there is a lot of discussion that we see among perpetrators on the dark web precisely on how to evade detection. It takes place in hidden spaces, and we need to work together also with the private sector to shed more light on the phenomenon and to better help our children.
Thank you. And to build on what you stated here at the end, I mean, in order to protect children from all forms of sexual violence and sexual exploitation, how do you see the role of the EU and the civil society sector and the tech industry going forward?
Yes, thank you for that question. So in fact, here, the good news is that we all agree that we clearly need to do better in protecting our children. We're hearing about a lot of wonderful efforts here today, and yet I think we all agree that the problem is still staggeringly dramatic. And meeting it and dealing with it requires a well-structured approach with a clear division of responsibilities. Now, as Ilias already highlighted, tech companies have an important role to play here. We have seen enormous efforts over the past decade in protecting children, and a number of companies are doing quite well. Yet there is still significant room for improvement in some areas, and a lot of companies are not doing anything. Let me give you an example. Some adult platforms have few or no measures in place to prevent access by minors who sell or appear in other explicit videos. And any platform, most importantly the ones used by minors, whether they're targeting them or not, should apply safety by design principles to make it more difficult for predators to reach out to children and to ensure a safer online experience for children. Companies can also play a key role in stemming the flood of child sexual abuse materials by detecting and removing it when it is exchanged on their platforms. Now here, the tools and processes to detect non-commercial and commercial exploitation are similar. Companies that make efforts to detect child sexual abuse can also help identify where the ongoing exploitation is for commercial purposes. And from the EU side, already years ago, we have set up a European financial coalition to help companies and payment service providers to work together to trace payments and inform law enforcement. Now, at the EU level, what can we do as policymakers? We've already put in place clear rules on what is a criminal offense, including commercial exploitation and child sexual abuse tourism, and we're strongly encouraging prevention efforts and victim support. At the moment, in fact, we're working on legislation that will help further clarify the roles and responsibilities of companies. And we're planning to propose the creation of a dedicated EU center to prevent and combat child sexual exploitation and abuse. Now, that center should support companies in their efforts to protect children and stop the circulation of their abuse, and serve as a hub of expertise on prevention and victim support. And this brings me finally to civil society. Civil society has a role to play that is so central that it cannot be overstated in prevention, detection, and in victim support. Civil society can help us strengthen children, make them aware of online risks, and better protect themselves. It can give a voice to children's needs, can help design prevention efforts based on solid research, and it can support victims and provide a place of trust and confidence for children to seek help. Now, this is why we strongly support the work of civil society. The EU has funded inter alia the in-hope hotlines, which are available in all EU member states, to receive reports of child sexual exploitation and abuse and to support children. And that's also why I'm so glad to see the very well-deserved recognition that civil society is receiving here today. I want to extend my warmest congratulations to the 10 award winners, and many thanks for allowing me to participate. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for joining us here today and giving your insights on emerging trends and emphasizing the importance of cross-sectoral partnership. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
It is now time to move on to our next set of awarded members. Our next organization is based in France and has been dedicated to combating commercial sexual exploitation of children for decades. I'm delighted to introduce ACPE from France. We're proud to have ACPE as an awarded member. Since 1986, ACPE has been fighting against sexual exploitation of children. Their mission is to alert and inform institutions, educate the public about commercial sexual exploitation of children, participate in trials against perpetrators, and to support the affected young people, families, and professionals.
And now I welcome Margot Mill, legal responsible of Agir contre la prostitution des enfants. We are very excited to have you as a part of the Child10 Action Group.
Hello, thank you very much.
You play a critical role in France when it comes to highlighting the existence of child victims of commercial sexual exploitation and supporting them through your various direct services and prevention programs. Can you tell us more about the work that you are doing in this regard? And is there anything that the people watching this can do to help your work easier?
Yeah, thank you very much again. So actually, France has recently launched the first national plan against children being commercially and sexually exploited in November 2021. However, we believe that important work remains in informing professionals and the general public about three main things: what leads to this type of behavior, how to react if faced with it, and finally, how to anticipate it. In our association, we have two ways of making the general public aware of this issue. First, campaigns, for example, on social networks, and also training programs for all professionals. About our social networks, we have launched recently a TikTok campaign aimed at young people on the risk of sending nudes and the revenge porn phenomenon. About training programs, we offer training courses from 1 to 5 days throughout France. These modules aim on one hand to make known the phenomenon of child exploitation. So we talk about the reality that it covers, its psycho and social aspects, and its legal aspect. On the other hand, we explain how to take care of the victims based on their experience of our phone permanence and our assistance throughout their process of reconstruction. For this training, we benefit from the help of several partners. We work with a specialist on social network, another specialist on children disappearance, a theater company that puts educators in situation, and finally, a sexologist. We would be very interested to know what other associations are implementing effectively in other countries to help these young people and to train their educators and all professionals. That could really inspire us. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Margot, and thank you for the excellent work that you're doing with ACPE. It is now time to move a little bit further south from France. Our next organization is based in Spain and has been fighting for the rights of women and children for over 3 decades. I'm happy to introduce our 6th awarded member organization of 2022, the Association for the Prevention, Reintegration, and Care of Prostituted Women, APRAMP, from Spain. We are proud to have APRAMP as an awarded member. Equipped with a strong human rights and gender-based approach to combat human trafficking and sexual exploitation, they are working with and for women and children victims of human trafficking for over 35 years. They offer holistic interventions tailored to the specific needs and situation of every individual.
And now with us from Spain, we have Brianna Noel Hodge, Director of Protected Housing for Child Victims at APRAMP. Brianna, thank you for your long and hard work to support women and child victims of trafficking and sexual exploitation. In addition to your impressive and holistic support program, you also have a very strong approach to survivor inclusion. We know that many organizations and agencies want to do better in terms of survivor inclusion. What would you say are your main keys to success?
Thank you so much, first of all, for allowing us to be here. We are so excited and honored. At APRAMP, we do work for and with victims of human trafficking, taking this to heart in every aspect of our work. Where survival inclusion is fundamental. They are the foundation of our work, beginning with the very detection of women and girls in situations of trafficking to victims' rehabilitation and reinsertion. Throughout APRAMP's long history, not only have we seen how critical it is to offer real alternatives for survivors upon recovery, but also that it is only with their help that other victims escape the hands of their exploiters. For this reason, APRAMP's Mobile Rescue Unit consists of survivors of human trafficking, women who have been rescued from their exploiters, who have gone through recovery, and who, through their own fruition, have decided to dedicate their professional career to helping to save others. These brave women receive certified training, making them well-rounded professionals specialized in the detection of trafficking victims, as well as in intercultural mediation. The survivor's role is essential in the processes of recovery, empowerment, and acquisition of autonomy. Their knowledge is not only theoretical, but practical, having directly lived the horrors themselves. No one understands the reality of trafficking better than these women, allowing them to establish connections and trust with victims that help facilitate immediate responses. Survival inclusion allows for survivors themselves to blossom into specialized professionals taking control of their lives. And as they themselves begin their new life through labor insertion, they will help other individuals in similar situations begin their own life free from exploitation and thus continuing the cycle of recovery.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for sharing these valuable and powerful insights, and for the very important reminder about the need of survivor involvement and inclusion at all levels across all different kinds of programs. And we're going to continue to talk about survivor inclusion right now. So to move on in our program, I hand over to you, Faryal.
Thank you, Jacob. As an organization, Child10 strongly believes that the experiences and expertise of survivors is critical in developing effective policies and programs to end trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. AppRamp has already opened the discussion about survivor inclusion, and we'll continue the conversation here with the two survivor leaders who are both experts in the field and who are both also founders of survivor-led organizations themselves. Please allow me to welcome in the studio Gabriella Schanekul-Wolf, who is the co-founder of Swedish survivor organization, Not Your Whore, which connects and amplifies the voices of commercial sexual exploitation victims. Gabriella is also recently appointed as the Swedish Ombudsman against commercial sexual exploitation of children. Welcome, Gabriella, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Our second guest is joining us through a video link today, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Malaika Uringo, CEO and founder of Footprint of Freedom, a survivor-led organization that advocates for giving survivors a voice and the opportunity to lead. Malaika campaigns for victims' rights and works to strengthen survivor inclusion and engagement in decision-making processes. She was also a 2021 awarded member for Child10. So I'm very happy to welcome Malaika back to our award this year. Thank you for joining us, Malaika.
Thank you very much, Fred.
So I'll move straight into the question that I have for both of you, because you both are survivor leaders and have founded organizations working on this topic. I want to know how you view the current challenges and the state of survivor inclusion in this field when it comes to both programming and policies. Malaika, would you like to start?
Well, first I would like to thank Child10 for including me and engaging me in this conversation that I'm passionate about. And congratulations to all the 10 awarded members. Regarding the question of the current state of survivor inclusion, from a survivor perspective, I think survivor inclusion is limited and discriminatory. This is due to lack of participatory plan of action and guidance that calls for accountability and a form of process for survivors to be consulted in anti-human trafficking legislation and policymaking. Although the current United Nations Global Action Plan of combating human trafficking encourages government and the civil society sectors to work towards survivor inclusion and engagement in addressing human trafficking, there is still noticeable institutional resistance in adaptation of survivor meaningful inclusion, because it kind of collides with the traditional way of providing assistance to vulnerable people in the non-governmental sector and in the government sector. And also this resistance is due to lack of finance and financial capacity to employ or compensate survivors. And also the lack of evidence-based research towards the impact measurement for survivor inclusion. From my personal experience, although I've been on the front line in the fight against human trafficking in the last 17 years, I started being compensated the last 4 years and taking my engagement as a resourceful contributor. We need to remember that survivors have already worked for free. And it's very absurd that they have to be re-exploited by organizations that are supposed to protect them. You talked about challenges. As a survivor leading a survivor-led organization, we face a lot of challenges, one of which is lack of funding for our programs. This is because the donors and the funders set the bar too high for survivors, survivor-led organization to be credible competitors for the donation alongside big organizations. Another big challenge is that we are overworked, understaffed, and struggle with compassion fatigue. When survivors come to us, they've been failed, broken, and re-victimized by the system and the NGOs, which requires time, resources to restore survivors to become striving members of the community. But since we have limited resources, we work extra hours without pay because we understand their struggle. I know that 50% of survivors that are rescued end up into re-exploitation because of these systematic gaps. Although we understand the importance of self-care, but for us it's a luxury that we cannot afford because we understand that to end the vicious circle of human trafficking, we need to be consistent and present and passionate.
Thank you, Malaika. I want to move to you, Gabriella, with the same question. Your experience has been more focused in Sweden, so I want to ask you how you view, Malaika talked about a lot of the challenges, and I concur that some of them will be similar to what you face in Sweden.
Yeah, that's correct. In a Swedish context, I would agree with Malaika that the survivor inclusion is limited and is rather focused on exploiting survivors rather than including survivors. In a Swedish context, I would say that the inclusion is based on asking survivors to tell their stories rather than asking for survivors' views, opinions, and solutions on the issue. In Sweden, in Swedish, I would say that survivors are being used as a pathos element. So as a sort of rhetorical tactic for the CSO sector to gain funds for their programs and for decision makers to gain arguments and backing and support for the solutions that they have already come up with without including survivors in that decision-making process. This is unethical and it risks to only highlight certain types of abuse and survivor stories. The decision makers, the CSO sector and the media will always be tempted to use the stories that are most likely to gain sympathy because that is what the stories are being used for. And therefore we are seeing stories that are with as young children as possible, with as much violence as possible and with as much details from the exploitation as possible. And I also think that this is very ineffective because the competence and the expertise of the survivors is not being used. We are not only survivors, we are experts.
Absolutely, and I think the challenges that you both have talked about prove to show that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. So I want to ask you that having worked on this issue for so many years now, how do your experiences guide your work going forward in the initiatives that you have coming forward? And I want to come to you, Gabriella, first, because I know that you've recently started a new position as the Swedish Ombudsman against commercial sexual exploitation of children. How do you think what you have learned from all these years will be beneficial in your work going forward?
I think that I always have and always will have my experiences as a guide in my work, also in my role as the new Swedish Ombudsman against commercial sexual exploitation of children. This perspective is integrated in everything that I do, in all of my thoughts and all of my feelings, whether I wanted to or not. And in a Swedish context, I feel that this can often be seen as a weakness rather than a strength. I am seen as not being able to view the issue from an objective point of view, and I am seen as being too emotionally attached to the issue to work with it as an expert. But in the fight against commercial sexual exploitation, I feel like what perspective is more important than that of survivors and victims, because these are the people that we are fighting for. I feel like there's a contradiction between being an expert and being a survivor, where you are only allowed to be one of them. And as I said, this is very ineffective, but it's also, I feel like it is creating a picture of survivors that is dishonest and that is harmful for victims of exploitation. Because survivors are only seen as passive actors rather than the active experts that we are. And I also lastly want to highlight the importance of not only including one survivor in this decision-making processes. In my role as ombudsman, I think it is important for me to not settle with only knowing that I have my own experiences of commercial sexual exploitation to guide my work, but to also include other survivors, because our stories are many and they are different.
Thank you, Gabriella. I want to come to you, Malaika. Gabriella talked about including more survivors, and I know that that's something that you really strive to do with your organization, Footprint of Freedom. So I want to ask how you think that all of these years of work that you've done guides your work coming forward.
First, I would like to thank Gabriella again. Her points really resonates well with how the role of survivors have been undermined and we've been used as a currency for domination and for political agendas. But when it comes to our experience, I think the experience makes us vulnerable leaders. And there's nothing as important as a leader who can vulnerable is not a weakness, it's strength actually when it comes to leadership, especially when you're dealing with survivors who have got trauma, that people can be, other survivors can be able to relate your experience, to align their experience with yours, to have hope. What I can say that my surviving experience and freedom has empowered me to believe that empowered survivors make traffickers vulnerable. And this lived experience has helped me to pave the way for the justice for so many survivors to get justice that I never got, through sharing information about the systematic gaps, building awareness and training, and giving insight about the strategies that traffickers use to bind victims into slavery. Also, my lived experience has given me wisdom to lead others out of slavery through mentorship and empowerment, because I'm able to identify with their fears during what they go through, or their fears during legal proceeding. And also I can relate to them on the cultural level, where the barriers, from some barriers that hinder them from accepting services. So I can say that this wisdom that comes with lived experience has given me a more understanding, a higher scope of understanding how to respond to human trafficking in an holistic manner. And also it has opened my urge to understand from and learn from other survivors how we can collectively fight or join hands as survivors to end human trafficking.
Thank you, Malaika. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but I want to quickly steer this conversation to talk about solutions and your recommendations to CSOs and policymakers who genuinely are interested in improving and increasing meaningful survivor inclusion. I think your recommendations can be very valuable for these organizations. So I want to ask you what kind of advice you would like to give them. Malaika.
Because of the limited time, I'll quickly rush through them. First and foremost, meaning survivor participation begins with a political will that promotes diversity and equity in survivor inclusion and engagement. Survivors reflect diversity within our countries, as Gabriella said. They represent race, nationality, disabilities, religion, age and gender, and socioeconomic status. Hence, if we are to kind of attain a meaningful survivor inclusion, it requires a diverse survivor engagement. Secondly, for the COS, civil society sector, we need to shift from symbolic survivor engagement to create more partnership by hiring survivors into leadership position within your organization. Collaborate with survivor-led organization, and also maybe offer organization support. For example, Footprint of Freedom got a mentorship organization support from Child10. It has been a game changer in how we've been able to move forward within the structure of our organization. Lastly, and very important, is that there should be a political will to shift the power and resources that are dominated by professionals and the civil service sector, because we need to encourage equal power sharing in leadership role at all levels of the system in anti-human trafficking prevention, because the expertise of survivors will help reframe the structure of power, authority within anti-human trafficking organization, and inform more effective policies that are survivor-driven in the fight against human trafficking.
Thank you, Malaika. Gabriela, quickly coming to you, what kind of recommendations do you want to add?
I agree with all of Malaika's recommendations. I think they are very well thought through. If I was to add anything, I would want to add that we need to remember to pay survivors for their inclusion and their participation. We can always get survivors to work for free because we know the issue that we're working against. But as organizations and as decision makers, it is important that we don't let survivors work for free. We need to pay them. And I also want to highlight the importance of making it as easy as possible for survivors to be included and to participate in decision-making processes. We need to remember that survivors are competent experts, they are empowered, but commercial sexual exploitation also leads to severe consequences, and many victims are traumatized, and we need to
support them in their reintegration process.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gabriela, and thank you, Malaika. Thank you, both of you, for the valuable insights and the recommendations. It is now time to move on to our next. Awarded member organization. Please allow me to introduce our next awarded member for 2002, Society Ključ from Slovenia. We're proud to have Society Ključ as an awarded member. It is the only specialized NGO in Slovenia working in the field of combating trafficking in human beings. They undertake both prevention activities and offer direct assistance to adults and children victims of trafficking, as well as at-risk individuals. They have a strong gender-sensitive approach and challenge stereotypes against women and girls through their prevention programs.
And Polona Kovac, President of Society Ključ, welcome here and welcome as a Child10 awarded member. Your programming has a strong focus on building resilience and self-esteem amongst the children, but also challenging gender stereotypes. I know you do excellent work in supporting young victims, but also preventative measures for children and young people in schools and university. Can you share a bit more about your work on reducing the demand and challenging these gender stereotypes and norms around sexual exploitation?
Yes, of course. Thank you for your question, and also thank you for acknowledging the importance of our work. Society Ključ Center for Fight Against Trafficking in Human Beings works both in the field of prevention as well as offering different forms of assistance to actual and potential victims of trafficking. And since young people are one of the most vulnerable groups, we believe that outreach approach with raising awareness among them is important. Thus, we have developed different preventive programs and approaches in order to both empower them with the knowledge on protection and importance of seeking help when it is needed, specifically addressing the fact that the responsibility for any kind of violence always lays on perpetrator. And on the other hand, if we talk about ending the demand of services of persons in prostitution, among which there are often minors, we should actively do something on the side of the demand. This is why we started with the program Key Information for Boys, targeting adolescents in high schools and discussing with them the topics of consent, pornography, and prostitution. Our workshops are very well accepted both by school staff and attendees who find them interesting because we talk with them about actual cases, tell stories of real people, and give them a chance to contribute with their opinions. As well as educating boys is, on the other hand, also important to teach girls about consent, personal boundaries, and harms that prostitution can cause. So we also developed a program specifically for them, which is also very positively accepted in schools.
Thank you so much, Bolona. We're moving on with the program to our next awarded member from Bulgaria. The organization has been working tirelessly on the issue of human trafficking and sexual exploitation since before gender-based violence was even recognized in Bulgaria, and it was through their efforts that a legislation was passed. I'm delighted to introduce Gender Alternatives Foundation from Bulgaria. We're proud to have the Gender Alternatives Foundation as an awarded member. It is a non-governmental organization working in the area of gender-based violence, specifically domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking in human beings. Through strategic litigation at local, national, and European levels, GAF is protecting the rights and interests of women and children victims of violence.
And with us now from Bulgaria, we have Milena Kadjeva, Managing Director of Gender Alternatives. Milena, as we just heard, you offer legal support to victims of gender-based violence, including online violence and commercial sexual exploitation. Could you explain how you use strategic litigation to strengthen the protection systems for victims of gender-based violence at national, but also on a regional level?
Thank you for your question, and thank you for considering us for this very important award. So in reply, I have to tell you that as a team consisting of 10 lawyers, 2 psychologists, 2 social workers, and an accountant, the Gender Alternatives Foundations provide legal counseling and legal representations to victims of gender-based violence at national, regional, and international level. Our lawyers are specialized in the human rights protection of women and children. The Program for Strategic Litigation ensures yearly legal support to about 700 victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking in human beings. Through the legal representation, those who are vulnerable and cannot afford a lawyer can have effective protection in court. In addition to the personal benefits of the victims, the Program for Strategic Litigation ensures that through the case law, the judges are also trained and educated how to work more effectively for the protection of women and children. Further, through the strategic litigation, the government and the relevant official institutions are provided with information about the roots and causes of gender-based violence, the number of the victims and their needs, including legal, psychological, social, and medical support. Furthermore, the case law is an evidence before the international and European human rights courts and tribunals about the level of efficiency of the states in the area of protection against gender-based violence.
Thank you so much, Milena, and it's great to have you on board. We're now moving on in the program, and now I have another guest here, Elise Toen, Director of Policy and Program at Child10. Welcome.
Thank you, Jacob.
Just during the last year, Child10 opened up an office in Vienna. Can you describe a little bit more about why that happened and the purpose?
Yes, absolutely. So in October last year, I relocated from Stockholm to Vienna to open our international office, as you mentioned. And the vision behind this office is twofold. So firstly, we want to have a closer working relationship with key regional and international policymakers in the field, like the UN, the OSCE, and the EU. We want to strengthen the child rights-based approach in all international actions in this field. But we also want to be closer to the organizations in our action group and to support them in having their voices heard in all these policy processes.
And from a more of an impact perspective, how would you describe the importance of linking the on-the-ground work and the grassroots level to the policy level?
Well, I think based on our experience, we know that there is often such a disconnect between organizations working on the ground and the policy processes at international level. And we seek to ensure that those organizations working directly with child victims and children at risk are heard whenever measures are being discussed to support protection and preventative measures in this field. So I think, it's such a big part of our organizational DNA to not just strengthen collaboration between CSO sectors in this field, like Farial mentioned earlier, but to also strengthen the collaboration across sectors and across borders. And I think this international office is an important step in order to achieve this.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
It is now time to move on to our last set of awarded members for today. So allow me to introduce awarded member number 9, Athena, Citizens Association for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings and All Forms of Gender-Based Violence from Serbia. We're proud to have Athena as an awarded member. Athena's work is guided by the needs of women and girl survivors of human trafficking, exploitation, and gender-based violence. They focus specifically on migrant women and children as a high-risk group and have a gender-sensitive and holistic approach, including impact-driven advocacy, direct services, and prevention programs.
And I'm excited to introduce Mariana Savic, Director of Athena. Mariana, your programs for victims of trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation have a very strong gender-sensitive approach, but also a focus on migrant women and girls. Can you tell us a bit about these programs and how you tailor them to build on the experiences of the beneficiaries?
First, regards from Belgrade, and thank you. I'm happy to be here with you today. Girls and women, independent, empowered, and with the possibility to have free choices and stand up for themselves is Athena's main aim to achieve. The work of the organization Athena is guided by the needs of more than thousands of women and girls from different backgrounds, ethnicities, sexual orientation, hundreds of refugee and migrant women and girls survivors of human trafficking and gender-based violence, and is created together with them. Our program of support is flexible, individualized, allows space for change, and provides chances for women and girls to accept and overcome experience of trauma and continue to grow. Another important thing to make all this possible is to achieve social and political change, to shift power relations in our communities. And this is why we invest in our advocacy group of migrant and refugee women and girl survivors. It is a guiding star and the model for other communities to learn how to build trust and solidarity, and above all, to listen to each other. When women and girls get information that helps them make proper decisions, save space and time to articulate their needs, and when there is a trust and respect for every single experience and acknowledgement of their unique position, that is the moment when the change begins. That is what our programs are all about, creation of conditions for girls and women to regain self-respect and strength to fight back. And when women and girls become agents of change, change does happen. And in the long run, that also changes governments, national and international policies. And thanks once again for this recognition. It's meant well to us.
Thank you so much, Mariana, and the feelings are mutual. We are so grateful to have you as a part of our action group. With this, we're getting closer to the end of today's program with only one more awarded member waiting to be introduced. I'm excited to present to you our 10th and final awarded member for 2022, Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Croatia. We're proud to have the Center for Missing and Exploited Children as an awarded member. It is a leading organization in the region and has been working for more than 15 years in the field of protection of children from abuse and sexual exploitation on the internet. In cooperation with the community, experts, and competent institutions, they work on abuse prevention and provide direct support to victims and their families.
So for our last stop on this journey across Europe, we will go to Osijek in Croatia to meet Tomislav Ramljak, the director of Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Tomislav, as we heard in the video, you have a long experience of running programs related to countering commercial sexual exploitation of children online. But we were very impressed in how you have implemented these programs and how you have been able to form successful partnerships with other actors and sectors in this work, working towards a more holistic ecosystem of service providers. Can you tell us something about how you managed to do this and what has been the success for you?
Greetings from Croatia. I'm really honored to represent my organization here today. Well, thanks to our daily work with the children, we get creative ideas on how to design quality and applicable professional prevention projects and programs. Since our organization has been working in this field for 15 years, we are recognized as experts on this field in this region. Also, one of the most important goals of our organization is to connect all relevant stakeholders in order to get a holistic approach to the protection of the children's rights in digital environment. Many years of work on this topic has been recognized in the surrounding countries. Small language differences, we have managed to expand our activities by opening the center in the Republic of Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina to form a network for better exchange of good practice.
Thank you, Tomislav. And once again, congratulations to all the awarded members for 2022.
Yeah, thank you, and congratulations to all from me as well. I'm really looking forward to this upcoming year of work. Before we end this ceremony, we have one more very special guest who wants to share a few words with us. At Child10, we are very grateful to have Her Majesty Queen Silvia's Foundation Care About the Children as our main partner. The commitment of the foundation and from Her Majesty Queen Silvia herself has been essential in making our work with the awarded members possible. For decades, Her Majesty has been a strong advocate for children's rights. And Her Majesty has been a groundbreaking and world-leading pioneer when it comes to bringing the realities of child trafficking and sexual exploitation into the light. Her Majesty's lifelong dedication to raise the issue of sexual exploitation of children has had a fundamental impact on the global community to increase the efforts to protect the most vulnerable children. I'm very proud to introduce our next speaker, Her Majesty Queen Silvia.
Ladies and gentlemen, eminent Child10 awarded members. During the ongoing pandemic, sexual exploitation of children has increased. Perpetrators all over the world have quickly adapted to the new circumstances and vulnerabilities of children. Poverty, dysfunctional home situations, and limited access to school and social services around the world have put children at particular risk, especially through online recruitment and online exploitation. Digitalization has opened up a new world of possibilities in how we connect with each other. It has made it easier for children to explore, learn, and connect with other children. But it has also made it easier for traffickers and perpetrators to reach them. Traffickers are quick to utilize digital tools and social media to recruit and lure children into exploitation. As a global community, we need to increase our efforts to make the internet a safe place for children to connect, learn, and to be curious. My foundation, Care About the Children, has since the beginning been working hard to support and ensure protection of the most vulnerable of children through collaborations. We have been fortunate to meet numerous fantastic organizations throughout the world working to ensure the safety and support for children victims of sexual exploitation. But as the number of exploited children is constantly increasing, we need to do more, and we need to do it together. The work that you do as Child10 awarded members is very important, and we can all be inspired by your strong commitment to protect children. I'm proud that my foundation has been given the opportunity to support the work of Child10 and the 10 exceptional selected organizations here today. Congratulations on your dedicated and impactful work to combat trafficking and other forms of commercial sexual exploitation of children throughout Europe. And my warmest congratulations to you on becoming Child10 awarded members. I look forward to closely following your work. Thank you, and the best of luck.
Thank you for those words, Her Majesty Queen Sylvia. And thank you for your tireless struggle for children's rights and your commitment to not let any children slipping through the net. Dear all, it is all our responsibility to end child trafficking. Every year, millions of children are being sexually exploited around the world. And reports indicate that this number is rather increasing than decreasing. Again and again, we see how the official protection system fails to protect children from this heinous crime. However, as the Child10 awarded member organizations that we have met today teach us, and the many, many others that we have had the privilege to meet during the last years, there are solutions out there. The knowledge is there, and the methods are there. What we need to do is to connect the dots. We need to listen to the experts, to the survivors, and to the organizations working tirelessly on the ground. And we need to build the link between the decision makers and the victims. And we need to do it together. We need to team up, to collaborate and to coordinate our efforts across organizations, across sectors, and across borders. And this is what we have set out to do throughout the Child10 Award program. Thank you all for being with us here today. Please continue to follow our journey, or even better, get in touch with us and let's discuss on how we can join forces and do even more impact together. Are there any final words that you want to share, Faryal?
Thank you, Jacob. I would just like to mention that it has been an absolute privilege to work with the awarded member organizations and learn about all the exceptional work that they're doing on the ground. I hope that everyone watching us today feels the same. I also want to echo your urge to keep in touch with us and follow the continued work through our website and social media channels. Even though today marks the end of a very rigorous research and selection process for us, it also marks the beginning of our joint work with the awarded members. Finally, I want to thank everyone who has contributed to making this event and the award program possible. Of course, our awarded members, our partners, speakers, the production crew here at the studio, and finally, everyone watching us today. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.